we're changing the law. We are expanding the law without any legal authority to do so.
No.
We're the Armed Attorneys. Today we're talking about, with the ATF pretty hot in the news right now, we're talking about how and why the ATF gets to make regulations and rules that really control the lives of gun owners. Make sure you stick around to the end. We're going to give you a critical update on arm braces, which we're getting a ton of questions about right now. And before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button.
And to kick things off, we're talking about, we have different levels of, kind of rulemaking authority, laws, and what kind of binds our society together here in the United States. Now, the idea behind this is there's a hierarchy. We have the United States Constitution, our formation documents, and that kind of lays out the essential structure of the federal government. The Constitution says, here are your enumerated powers. This is what you're allowed to do. Go forth and, take care of business. Now, everything is not laid out in the Constitution. And what they have done is they've said, hey, Congress, this is where you're allowed to pass laws. And that's where we see the United States Code. That's where that comes into effect. But even apart from that, that's not really where it ends, because Congress doesn't outline every single detail as much as maybe we want them to. And that leaves us with agencies and their kind of rulemaking authority and what we're left with in the Code of Federal Regulation. Talk us through that, Emily.
Yeah. And, so this is meant to be, right? Congress passes the laws, but Congress doesn't really dig into the nitty gritty of how to implement the law that they pass. And, as much as, federal agencies have really overreached at this point, the idea behind it, I think, is generally a good one, which is that Congress, your congressman, might not be an expert in that thing that they've passed a law about. So, let's say hypothetically that you've got a congressperson who has laid out a law, and that person is qualified for their job by having been a bartender in the past. So do I really want that bartender deciding what level of rat poison is safe for me to consume in my food? Right?
Right.
Probably not. I want experts, right? I want experts figuring out how to implement the laws that say that the consumables I purchase have to be safe for me to consume. Good idea in theory. In practice, of course, what we see is basically these unelected shadow bodies, which are the federal agencies, making the laws that we have to live by, and they're not accountable to us, right? Which is what makes it kind of scary. So, Richard, do you want to lay out the brief process by which this happens?
Yeah, and I'll add one note here, because and this was a fear of the founders, that the necessary and proper clause, and you hear this come up in this context from time to time, that the necessary and proper clause was going to balloon the size of government. Little did they know that actually is not what happened, and it's actually under the Commerce Clause where we find most of the Congress passing these laws and then delegating their authority to agencies to write regulations. So as far as the process goes, we have an agency. This is saying, hey, Congress says, hey, agency, we want you to regulate this area. The agency proposes a rule, and they publish that rule. Now, from there, this is what we call a proposed rule. Mm-hmm. The agency then gathers comments from the public saying, hey, public, give us, your input on this is the rule that we want to put into effect. At that time, they gather all the comments. They close the comment period.
Which has to be at least 30 days,
It has
right?
to be at least
Sometimes
30
it's
days.
longer, but
And they can set it longer if they want to. Then they have to address those comments and tailor the rule to address these things. Now, if you have something like pistol arm braces that receive tens of thousands of comments, some of them very unique, it takes a lot of time for the agency to respond to each of these things. They'll group similar comments together and address them with one answer. But if you have lots of unique questions, then they have to dig through these things and address them. At that point, they publish what they call a final rule. Now, the final rule is what they say is going to become the law after a certain period of time. Now, it's 120 days. They can shorten it to as little as 30 days, depending on what they want to do. And that's what we see with a lot of things, especially in the arena with firearms, because the Congress has seemingly fallen asleep at the wheel and has left it to these agencies to decide how we should all live our lives.
And I will say, for, I guess, to the ATF's credit, I'll say that, sometimes, let's think back to the green tip ammo rule that they were talking about under the Obama administration, which would have really highly restricted all of our 223 and 5.56 ammo would have basically gone away. The public comment, the outpouring, they actually just withdrew that rule, right? They did their jobs. They put the rule forward. The comments flew in and they went, never mind, not going to rule on this at all, unnecessary, we get it, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't always end in a final rule, I guess is what I'm saying, but most of the time.
Right. And, this is where we come into, and this is what causes lots of consternation with gun owners, is these agencies are not supposed to be making law, especially when it comes into direct conflict with the Congress. And we see this come up over and over and over again with regard to firearms. The Congress will define something, or they'll expressly regulate something, and then the ATF will come in and contradict Congress, our elected representatives. And so this comes up from time to time. A really good example of this would be like bump stocks, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. And just, and we don't need to belabor the bump stock point here, but, I think we've made videos on it in the past. But bear in mind, Congress laid forth a definition of machine gun, right? We know what it means to be a fully automatic weapon. One pull of the trigger results in multiple bullets leaving the barrel of the gun, right? That's not the technical definition, but that's the definition, right? So how can you then say that a bump stock is a machine gun, because it's still one trigger pull, one bullet, right? Yeah. So we have, that's not, this is how we implement this law that Congress has passed. This is the rule that helps us implement. We're changing the law. We are expanding the law without any legal authority to do so.
No.
Hence, Potion v. Garland.
Yeah. No. And then this is why it's so important. Make sure to subscribe. We're talking about this in the next video, how the ATF is really going to get reined in on this one, because we have, 3 big cases out of the Supreme Court that we all need to be watching. Some of these have already been decided. The West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency and the Major Questions Doctrine, New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, and the new standard under which we judge Second Amendment infringements. And then, as Emily just said, a Potion v. Garland, which has been rescheduled a countless number of times, but addressing the bump stock issue.
Yeah, we actually did a podcast with Mr. Potion.
Yeah, we did.
And he was very frustrated that his case has been reset so many times, but it's coming.
Yes, and so that brings us to our update on the arm brace rule, which we had a proposed rule offered up last year. Where are we at with that, Emily?
Hopefully we have a graphic up right now that's going to show you sort of that process by which rules are made. You can see arm braces dropped in between notice and comment period and final rule. Now, this is very, very confusing, because the ATF made a bunch of announcements. The Biden administration made a bunch of announcements that made it sound like the arm brace rule would be going into effect within the next couple of weeks, right? In the month of August. It is not. We have not seen a final rule yet. Once we see a final rule, you will have a period, where we look and interpret it and figure out how to comply. So even once they release the final rule, it won't go into effect immediately. And so it really is, we're having people call in. The reason we wanted to address this in this video, we're having people call in, by the dozen, asking what to do with their arm braces next month. And the answer is nothing, not yet. Don't worry. I would say don't buy any arm braces right now.
Yeah,
though.
Maybe. And we
because you might waste your money is the thing.
Yeah, and we anticipate the final rule on pistol arm braces to land sometime in December 2022. Now, at that point, the rule could go into effect as early as January, but more likely than not, we're looking at a March 2023 timeline. So that's when you can anticipate the rule. And now you'll see a lot of people talking on the internet speculating, what is the rule going to do? What is the schedule? What does the point system look like? And the real answer is we just don't know.
We have no idea.
It could change so much. And so, without speculating, just know the final rule likely landing in December 2022, likely going into effect probably March 2023, but we'll see. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. Make sure to subscribe. We have a huge conversation coming in about the ATF getting reined in, those 3 big cases we talked about earlier. You won't want to miss that discussion.
And please drop your ATF love letters in the comments below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.